I grew up in Lewisville, Texas. And if you asked me what it was like growing up in Lewisville, Texas, I honestly wouldn't know how to respond to that question. I mean, my parents did a very good job of providing me with a materially good life, as well as a good life in terms of providing me with love and support. But in terms of the place itself, growing up in the city of Lewisville, I don't really know what it was like. Because truthfully, looking back on it, it was a very generic experience. Now, generic isn't necessarily bad, but it's also not necessarily good. And I didn't realize how dull my upbringing had been until I finally took the leap of faith and started traveling overseas. And I was able to see that, wow, people here grow up entirely differently. For example, in a place like the Netherlands, where my girlfriend grew up, it's very, very common to be able to just hop on your bike, take the bike lanes to wherever you want to go, and you can just operate at your own discretion in that way. And as somebody who values freedom, especially when I was a kid, I think I really would have liked that. Now, does that mean that I didn't do a lot of that when I was growing up? No, it doesn't. I still got on my bike and rode places, but the point is I didn't really have the same level of freedom growing up in the US as I would have had I grown up in the Netherlands. And I guess to revisit the question from the beginning of this video, what was it like growing up in Lewisville? It was restrictive. Not because my parents were strict or anything like that, but because the infrastructure and the general vibe of the city simply didn't allow for the same kinds of freedoms that Dutch children get to enjoy. Hence why Dutch children are rated amongst the happiest children in the world. That said, in this video, I'm going to be reacting to what it's like to grow up in Amsterdam. So I already have somewhat of a reference point for what it's like to grow up in the Netherlands because my girlfriend is born and raised in the Netherlands, but she didn't grow up in Amsterdam. She grew up in a much smaller suburb in Brabant. So I'm sure that growing up in a place like Amsterdam, a world-class international city within the Netherlands, with all of that same infrastructure that my girlfriend got to enjoy, must have been a one-of-a-kind experience. That said, let's go ahead and get into this reaction.
You're able to drive a car in the Netherlands when you're 18. You're able to drink, smoke, whatever you want, because that's when you become an adult. So it's celebrated.
Amsterdam is well known for its canals, bikes, coffee shops, and of course, the red light district. But how do young people here spend their free time, get around, and live? Meet Cosmo, a 19-year-old student born and raised in the Dutch capital. Today, he'll be showing us what his life in Amsterdam is like.
Goedemorgen en welkom in mijn appartement in Amsterdam. Or good morning and welcome to my apartment in Amsterdam. Come with me. And watch out because the stairs are very, very steep.
That's one thing about the Netherlands, especially in these older homes. I could tell this is kind of an older home. Those stairs are incredibly steep. Incredibly. I'm talking about if you fall off the top step, you might bounce once or twice on the way down because you don't even have enough space. The staircase isn't long enough for you to be able to hit all of the steps. It's so steep. So that always makes me nervous, and I'm 25, so I can only imagine if you're in your 60s or 70s and you can't really move properly anymore. I guess Dutch people probably can because they're more active, but I can only imagine how much more difficult it must be to get up and down these stairs when you're old.
So welcome to our house in the city center of Amsterdam. My mother actually lives up these stairs, and then I live here. So this is my flatmate.
Wait, hold on, let's go back real quick. Look at how steep these stairs are. That's insane to me. That's so insane. I guess the staircases are kind of like that in some American homes as well. It's more of an age thing than a location thing. But that's so insane to me.
And then I live here. So this is my flatmate. His name is Baby. He's kind of the party animal around here. But I have a very small kitchen and I have a very small bathroom. Very, very small. But I'm happy that at least I have my own bathroom and my own sink where I can wash my face in the morning. Usually I just start out by having some fluffy white bread. I would just slather this in a lot of butter. We are gonna slather everything Usually I wake up maybe 15 minutes because I have to leave. So this is the quickest thing I can do to really get the nutrients in. Hagelslag. It's basically just chocolate sprinkles.
In 2023, Amsterdam.
I never got the chance to try this right here. I think I might have seen a vegan version of this at Albert Heijn. Not entirely sure, but it does look good, I'm not gonna lie. Bread with chocolate sprinkles does look good. The butter is throwing me off a little bit though. If you're Dutch, I need you to explain to me how that's supposed to work, because I don't know about Dutch butter, but American butter is really salty, and I'm assuming Dutch butter is kind of similar. And for me, salt and chocolate don't really mix very well. Or I guess I haven't really tried it, so hey, maybe I'm just missing out on that, but I don't know. Personally, I'd probably use peanut butter or just go without the butter altogether. But from what I understand, this is a pretty typical Dutch breakfast right here. You have a piece of bread with the hagelslag, the butter. What was it like eating this growing up? I want to know, because growing up for breakfast, I probably ate Eggo waffles. So the little toaster waffles, chocolate chip flavor was my favorite. I remember I went through an era where I would eat that with Nutella. Probably not the best way to start your day as a developing child, but I didn't care. I was just looking for as much sugar as possible. Or cereal and milk, Cinnamon Toast Crunch, Cookie Crisp, etc. Those are all cereals that are probably banned in the Netherlands because they probably don't adhere to the health code regulations or whatever. But I don't really see this as being particularly healthy either, though, to be fair. I mean, chocolate sprinkles, I don't see how that is particularly healthy, unless it's dark chocolate, which is supposed to be good for you. But yeah, let me know what it was like eating this growing up, or what other breakfasts Dutch people like to eat.
Amsterdam was one of the most expensive cities in Europe to rent in.
I've never moved. This is where I've always lived. So most people that I know that are maybe even 25 or 30 still live with their parents just because they cannot afford living somewhere in Amsterdam.
That's something that when I look back on it, I think I noticed it, but I never made note of it, if that makes sense. Where I never really saw anybody who was my age in the Netherlands who just had their own apartment outright. And to be fair, it's relatively rare to be able to do that in the US as well. But I feel like in maybe some of the smaller cities, it is more common. Or maybe in places like LA, you'll have the outliers who are 22, 23 years old. I think I was 23 when I moved to the Netherlands. 23 years old, and they're just rich. They're balling. They run a successful e-commerce store, YouTube channel, or something like that. And they're able to live in a high-rise just based on that income. And at one point, I did have my own apartment in Texas. And I think it was $1,200 a month, which was pretty doable, but I don't think you're gonna find an apartment in Amsterdam for $1,200 a month. You might be able to find a room for that, but based on what I understand, for a lot of Dutch people, the only way they're gonna be able to move out of their parents' house if they don't get flatmates is they have to be with someone. So them and their partner will combine their incomes to be able to afford moving out and groceries and all of that stuff. But I also think that maybe because of the importance and value and emphasis placed on family in the Netherlands and in much of the rest of the world, it's not really that big of a deal. It's not something that would elicit shame from other people. People won't look down on you for still living with your parents like they would in some parts of the US.
The average monthly rent for a furnished one-bedroom apartment is 2,300 euros.
For me,
2,300. Dat is duur. Heel duur.
I would never leave, you know, if I don't have to.
But now it's time for class. Luckily for Cosmo, his university is just a short walk away.
When I finished high school, I was 17, and a lot of kids my age take a gap year, but I love being busy and I love doing stuff, so I didn't want to take a gap year.
17 years old. So I graduated at 17 as well, but I graduated a semester early. So basically in the state of Texas, you need 26 credits, and I think you get 1 credit per class or something like that. And basically, by the time I finished the first half of my last year of high school, I already had enough credits and I just graduated. But most people in the US graduate at 18 years old. Whereas in the Netherlands, depending on the level of education that you choose to pursue, based on the level of high school, which I've already forgotten all of the different classifications, but based on the level, you can graduate anywhere between 16 and 18 years old. And you can basically be 18 or 19 and already in the workforce, which is still mind-blowing to me. I think my girlfriend's brother, he is a plumber or something to that effect. He does some sort of manual labor like that. And he's, I think, a year or two older than me. And he's been working in that profession since he was probably 17 or 18. I could be wrong about that, but it was somewhere around there. He's been working at that profession for a long time. In the US, that just wouldn't be possible. Because if you graduate at 18, you have to go to trade school. 20 would be the absolute earliest you can get into that kind of trade. So that's a very big difference right there. And also, he said that a lot of students take a gap year. That's not very common in the US. Not very common at all. A lot of times, people will kind of look down on you if you take a gap year. They'll think that you're lost or something like that. Personally, I think you're lost if you're pulling out $100,000 in student loans and don't know why you're in college. But I don't know, that's just me.
Cosmo is now in his second year of studying creative business. He hopes to work in media one day.
If I would look at myself in 10 years from now, I'd probably be living in Amsterdam with my partner, and I'd probably be telling stories in some way or another. So these are one of the canals in Amsterdam. A lot of people park their car here, but there are no fences. So one time my mother actually slid into the water when everything had kind of frozen over. And it was winter, and then a rescue team had to come and rescue her. But that's also one of the reasons why every kid in the Netherlands goes to swimming classes.
That right there is one of my biggest fears, by the way. I can't swim. He just mentioned that every kid in the Netherlands takes swimming classes. We did as well, but I missed them because I had the flu, so I never learned how to swim. But that's one of my biggest fears, is falling into those canals because they don't have the fences. I never walk close enough to the canals to fall in, personally. I don't even entertain taking that risk.
When they're very young, because things like this do happen. You know, you're always surrounded by water. You have to use a lot of force because the doors are very ancient. Okay, come on in.
After class, it's time for a short break at home with his mother.
I love how much natural light Dutch homes seem to get. There's no window tint or anything. Even though there's not a lot of sunlight, I feel like the homes are more well lit.
When I got pregnant, people told me, "What are you going to live? You can't raise a kid in the middle of the center." And I said, well, no, I'm going to stay here. First of all, I love living here. And I am sure by the time he is 14, 15, he will hate me if I would tell him that I left the house.
Cosmo and his mother share a close bond. His grandmother was born in Indonesia and also played a big role in his life growing up.
There are a lot of people who are Indies or Indo, and that is people who come from Nederlands-Indië, which is former Dutch Indonesia, like my grandmother, for example, who was born in Jakarta, which was called Batavia at the time. That's why you will...
When did the Netherlands colonize Indonesia? I'm very curious to know that, because I think I had heard about it in passing, but I didn't really know that Dutch Indonesia was ever a thing. So please educate me in the comments.
Find a lot of Indonesian people here, a lot of Indonesian restaurants, a lot of Indonesian shops, you know, so there's just a lot of Indonesians here.
In the afternoon, Cosmo travels across town to bring lunch to his friends, who are also the founders of a queer newspaper.
It started all as...
I will say, I think if you are LGBTQ, the Netherlands is probably one of the best places to grow up. Because growing up where I grew up, in a more conservative area, the casual homophobia that was spewed around by other children when I look back on it, it's pretty frightening. And the Netherlands, I think, correct me if I'm wrong here, was the first country to legalize gay marriage. So they've been on the forefront of this for a very long time. So I can imagine how much more liberating it must have been to grow up in that kind of environment, a supportive environment for those kinds of people.
It was a school project, really, but we really felt the necessity of a LGBT plus newspaper in the Netherlands, because there's nothing similar that represents the youth in LGBT in the Netherlands yet.
On the fourth page is Cosmo's story. He wrote it all by himself, and he got a whole spread.
I was doing research on the hookup culture with dating apps in the Netherlands among queer youth, which is a very big thing. I mean, hookup culture is very big here, and I was very interested to see how what effects that has on young people in the Netherlands and in the queer communities.
In 2001, the Netherlands.
Something else that I just want to point out, and this is a topic that's pretty much been beaten to death, but growing up learning English to that extent where you're beyond conversational, you're completely fluent in English, that provides you with such a big advantage in life. I feel like Dutch children are pretty much set up for success from the get-go. Just based on that alone, just based on them being bilingual at a very high level. Because if you're from another country where they don't speak English and you never learn English, I can tell you right now, it's very difficult to learn a language when you get older. Very, very difficult. You don't even believe you can learn it. That's pretty much half the battle right there, is developing the belief that you can. So by them instilling that within the Dutch youth, they're allowing them so many more opportunities as they progress through life. Whereas in those other countries where they're not learning English, I mean, that's not to say they won't have opportunities, but their opportunities will be very, very limited.
The Netherlands was the first country to legalize same-sex marriage before Cosmo and many of his friends were even born.
And we always want to improve, you know, but it is true that it's still a tolerant city, and that we are really spoiled in that way. But you know, there's always space for improvement.
And as long as there is space, we will push it.
And here in the US, people are still against same-sex marriage. I don't understand that. I really don't understand that. I also don't understand why I just said here in the US and I'm filming this video in Thailand. Different discussion for a different day, but that's very, very fascinating to me. That Americans, not all Americans, but a pretty sizable portion of Americans are against gay marriage, because literally, what difference does it make if they're married or not? It doesn't make any difference at all. If they're together, they're together. You don't even know if they're married unless you see a ring around their finger. So it literally doesn't affect you in the slightest bit. It makes no sense.
So my main mode of transportation in the city is actually walking around. I love walking around. I know most Dutch people or people from Amsterdam, they cycle a lot, but whenever I can, I try to walk, if it's walking distance. And otherwise I take public transport because it's actually free for students.
Dutch teens can drive when they're 18, but in Amsterdam, using a car isn't exactly convenient.
That's really, really nice that they have the free public transit for students. That's a very big benefit. I think my girlfriend was also able to benefit from that when she was in college. But how old do you have to be to get on public transit by yourself? I'm very curious to know, because I'm sure they're not just going to let a 6-year-old, for example, get on the train by themselves with no adult supervision. Or maybe they do. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But what's the legal minimum age to get on the NS train or to get on the buses in the Netherlands?
There are a lot of people in Amsterdam that live here that don't have a car at all, because it's just a city that's very impossible to get through with a car, because as you can see, it's not really made for cars. It's made for boats and horse carriages, so having a car in the city can be a little bit dramatic if you want to get a parking spot. Also, parking is very expensive.
And a nice beer. Or Texas.
So, proost.
Oh yeah.
Proost. Hey. And always look each other in the eyes.
Otherwise you have 7 years of flat tax.
Yeah.
I think 18 is definitely a big age in the Netherlands, because that's when you become an adult. You're able to drive a car in the Netherlands when you're 18. You're able to drink, smoke, whatever you want, because that's when you become an adult. So it's celebrated.
That's so different because, as you probably know, in the US, you can drive at 16. You can actually get your driver's permit where you can drive with adult supervision at 15, believe it or not. And you're not allowed to drink until you're 21. Granted, a lot of teenagers drink anyways, but that's so interesting that you can drive a car for 5 years before you're able to drink. Granted, that's probably a good thing because otherwise you would have a lot more teenagers drinking and driving. So maybe that's part of the reason why the drinking age is so much higher. But at 16 in the US, that's when you gain your freedom and independence because you can drive. But in the Netherlands, you gain your freedom and independence much earlier, really from the time you're born, because you don't have to drive.
Often associated with adult life in Amsterdam is the red light district.
This is actually the oldest neighborhood in Amsterdam, but of course most people know it for the window prostitution and for the coffee shops and everything. And across from me right now there's also a few windows with women standing in them. And we can't film that, but it's something that you grow up with in Amsterdam and it's something that you respect. It's just a job, like other people are working a job, and you ought to be respectful to them and respect their decision in life.
The Netherlands has consistently been ranked as one of the happiest countries in the world, coming
To each their own. That's probably why it's consistently ranked as one of the happiest countries in the world. Aside from the infrastructure, a country that's that progressive and just allows people to do what they want to do as long as it's not to the detriment of other people, of course, that's going to cultivate a society. It's going to facilitate a culture of happier people because happiness is found when you pursue the things that you find valuable.
coming in 5th place in 2023. So how does a young adult like Cosmo feel about life in Amsterdam?
My least favorite thing about living in Amsterdam has to be the weather and sometimes the people, because the people can be a little bit closed off and a little bit rude sometimes. I think my favorite thing about living in Amsterdam definitely is the sense of freedom that you get here and also the versatility. I mean, the weather is versatile, the people are versatile, everything is just very versatile. So that's something that I really like. Amsterdam is definitely my home. I feel very at home here. I don't want to leave it. If I'd have to leave Amsterdam, I'd also leave the Netherlands and I'd go to another bigger European city.
That makes me wonder, if you're Dutch watching this, or if you're from wherever you're from in Europe, if you had to leave your home city and or home country, where else in Europe would you want to move? That's a very, very interesting one to me. Because I imagine someone from Amsterdam, for example, would be relatively comfortable in a place like Copenhagen. But I could be wrong about that because I haven't been to Copenhagen, nor have I really extensively been to Amsterdam. But if you're from Europe, and specifically if you're from Amsterdam or anywhere in the Netherlands, let me know what other country and what other city you would want to move to. Now, I think I've said this in a video before. In fact, I think I've dedicated a whole video to this before. But truthfully, if my girlfriend and I decide to have children in the future, I would much, much prefer to raise them in the Netherlands than really anywhere else. I mean, maybe there's another European country that could be in consideration, but of the places I've been to thus far in the world, the Netherlands is definitely at the top of the list for raising a child for all of the reasons that you've seen throughout this video.